Hello and welcome to Unclecthulu Reviews. Today I'm going to talk about history. And a while ago I did some stuff on Culloden and the Jacobite Rebellion. I did a couple of videos on that. And it was a bit of a departure from a normal miniature based stuff. And a couple of my pals, listeners asked, could I do some bit more about history? And maybe he's looking at what ifs and stuff. So I've got some of that planned for the future. But put my hat in the ring. I thought I'd do something which was, in my opinion, Britain's top 5 military disasters slash defeats. And these work on a couple of different levels. There's tactical level, which is actually what went wrong on the battlefield and why an army that maybe should have won didn't win. Or there's a strategic level, in which case, what did the loss mean strategically to the wider frame of things. And that's always interesting to consider for battles. So, for example, you had something like, and it doesn't make my top 5, so I'm quite happy talking about it now. So, Isandlwana, massacre of a British Redcoat Battalion, plus supporting Natal native contingent and other troops. This was a tactical disaster for the British. 20,000 Zulus wiped them out. Weren't expected to do that. Strategically, actually, it didn't have that much impact on the war. In fact, the British possibly reinforced the garrison, sent more troops, which meant the Zulu defeat would be more inevitable at the end of it. Certainly Chelmsford pulled back, got reinforcements, went in and finished the job at the Battle of Ulundi. There was obviously other battles there, Rockstrift, etc. So Isandlwana, tactically, a major defeat for the British. Strategically, set the campaign back a wee bit, but actually probably galvanised enough support for them to go and finish it. So, top 5 British military defeats. So, first off, coming in at number 5, in my opinion, would be the American War of Independence. So, specifically, battles like Saratoga. So the American army defeat the British. It was one of the first major defeats for the British Army in North America, fighting the Americans. Certainly Bunker Hill was technically a British victory, but at what cost, as one of the rebels famously said, I'd quite happily sell them every hill in America at that price. And the American War of Independence showed how difficult it would be to fight a determined enemy around the globe from an island nation with long supply lanes, especially when, say, the French and the Spanish got involved to help the Americans. So I'd say Saratoga was a key one. It also helped stop the belief that the British Army were invincible. A lot of it was down to poor British generalship, but like I said, number 5 was Saratoga. Number 4, Battle of Hastings. So Saxon British, maybe pushing the envelope a bit, but all the Saxons needed to do was stay on that hill. The shield wall had fought off several Norman attacks. They fell for the Norman tactic of retreating. They got pulled in off the hill, and the Normans won the battle. So tactically, they were defeated. Strategically, it was the end of the Saxon Godwinson reign, and the Normans took over Britain, England, and the country would never be the same again. So that was number 4. Number 3. So not putting Isandlwana in my top 5. What I'm going to mention is Kabul 1842, which is probably the worst British defeat by a native force. So what happened was a British army of approximately 60,000 troops had gone into Afghanistan. We have a long history going into Afghanistan. And it got to Kabul, and they'd thought that the army's presence would be enough to pull the Afghanistan population into compliance and create a buffer zone against Russia in the north, the Great Game. Didn't happen. long story short, British Army had to pull back to India. 16,000 troops, and their column and the force was just cut down, ambush, cut down, ambush, death by 1,000 cuts, pretty much the entire army wiped out. So that was number 3. Number 4, a naval engagement, probably is one of the least well-known British military defeats, possibly the most embarrassing naval British defeat in terms of prestige and who we are. So obviously Britain, being an island nation, prides itself on the strength of its navy and the strength of its defences against external aggressors. Certainly the English Channel has protected us from Spanish invasion, German invasion, and held us in good stead. So Medway, 1667. So what happened in Medway? Britain and Holland, the Netherlands, were at war over trade routes, trade rights, and the Dutch sailed a fleet up the Thames, dealt with the fort at Sheerness, and then went on to Chatham Docks, raided Chatham Docks. Now, the Dutch didn't know this at the time, but there was nothing between them and the rest of London sailing up. Now, the Dutch hadn't brought an army, they hadn't planned to go to London. They executed their plan perfectly, got to Chatham Docks, and they captured and took back to Holland the British flagship Royal Charles. So for an island nation that prides itself on its navy, boom, is it any wonder that we wanted to forget that as quickly as we could. And I think that was part of the thing that meant that was one of the actions in that engagement which led to terms being agreed. It was either that year or the year after. So finally, Britain's biggest military disaster. Utter failing on a tactical level. They were outfought by their opponents on the ground. And the strategic level, the loss of Singapore to the Japanese, 1942. So Singapore was the jewel of the Far East. It was the centre of the British Empire in the far East. Obviously India, but Singapore had dominated trading routes. We'd established it as a giant naval fortress. And it was the hub of sort of British operations in that area. The garrison was 80,000 troops. There were extra troops as well there to deploy to defend the Malay Peninsula as well. And the idea was that these troops could at least hold until relieved or fend off any invasion. The Japanese landed famously up the Malay Peninsula, advanced south and attacked Singapore. Japanese army was only 55,000 men. British troops at the peak during the engagement probably numbered up to about 130,000. So the Japanese were outnumbered 2-1, but they constantly outfought, outmaneuvered down the Malay Peninsula, then launched attacks across the sort of causeway into Singapore itself. And Sir Percival, who by all accounts was a pretty inept general, surrendered rather than face city fighting with a Japanese force in Singapore itself. So not only had we then lost approximately 100,000 Commonwealth troops, we also lost the idea of the British Empire invincibility and probably gave heart to a lot of independence movements in our former colonies. May or may not be a good thing in the long run. But yeah, we also lost a couple of battleships as well, which got attacked by Japanese air arms, and just a complete unmitigated disaster. I don't think there's been a British surrender as big as that on any level, and I don't think there's been a British defeat which included so many thousands of men. The Somme could be debatable. We claim that as a victory. Certainly, there was more troops lost in the battles on World War One, but when we're looking at Singapore, you know, the mistakes made by the British High Command are legion. So yeah, so that's my top 5 military defeats by Britain. So American War of Independence, Battle of Hastings, Kabul, the Medway, and Singapore. Let me know what you think. Let me know your thoughts. I'm going to do a couple on British military victories, just for balance. But actually, that's a lot harder than it thinks, because Britain generally doesn't lose that often. But when we do, as seen, it's quite spectacular. So, thanks for watching, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on it. Bye.